Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to our Seattle Public Library Foundation show tonight. I'm sitting here feeling just slightly less prepared in that for some reason my notes disappeared. So you're going to have to bear with me as I work through this tonight. We are so excited to have you all here. The crowd turnout is amazing. And I would just like to start with a few things and then we'll get rolling. So the first thing I'd like to do is just again say, I'm Jonna Ward. I run the Seattle Public Library Foundation. I'm here with the great folks at the Seattle Times and my team who's putting this all together. So to start, I just want to say that the Seattle Public Library is on Indigenous lands. These are the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people. And we are here, we honor the elders past and present, and we want to thank them for the stewardship of this land. Now, we are working in a virtual format, which is always interesting because it kind of creates a different way of doing this. But what it does do is it allows so many more people to participate. And you are going to see some amazing images tonight, and you're going to hear some unique stories. And I just want to start by saying thanks to the media partnership we have with the Seattle Times. You know, we have a shared belief about libraries as essential, but we also have that belief that access to information is fundamental to a healthy democracy. And so there's a lot about this partnership that makes sense and means a lot. Now, if you're not familiar with the foundation, we are the partner who really is here to help inspire philanthropic support, advocacy for, and pride in our library. And tonight we have many donors here and board members. And for those of you who are here, I just want to say thank you. You make so much at Seattle Public Library possible. In fact, just to put it in perspective, 1 out of every 4 items here at the Seattle Public Library are paid for through gifts from donors. Many programs, 40 of them or so, right in that range, whether it's equity-based work, whether it's education, whether it's enrichment, there's so much happening. And on top of that, we're coming into a good year of budget situation, thanks to some really great advocacy work. So tonight we're going to do this in a couple parts. I'll be shortly introducing our interim chief, Tom Fay, and then we will go to a pre-recorded presentation. And then we'll bring the photographic team on with us live for your questions. So with that, Tom, are you close at hand?
I am indeed, Jonna.
All right, I'm going to sign off and see you in a bit.
Great, thanks again. And I'm pleased to join the fans of the Seattle Times, the supporters of the foundation, and the Seattle Public Library's patrons. The library has enjoyed a great relationship with the Seattle Times. In our city, we appreciate both robust journalism and the promotion of library services. I'm really looking forward to tonight's program. Before I hand it off to the Times, though, I'd like to offer a few updates about the library. All 27 library locations are now open, and we're working hard to meet the needs of our community. But the latest surge has impacted our ability to deliver expanded hours and in-person programming. Like many public-facing entities, we face staff shortages regularly, but we manage those by redeploying staff across the system the best we can. Since the beginning of this, our focus remains on patron and staff safety as we offer library services throughout this city. We appreciate the patience of our patients. We appreciate the patience of our patrons as we continue to navigate the challenges presented by COVID-19. While we have safety challenges providing programming in person, we continue to offer programs online like the one we're going to see tonight. Many of our online programs are possible due to the foundation's support through generous donors that enhance our library services every day. This past year, we had a robust Summer of Learning program, and we continue to develop young readers through programs like Raising a Reader. We support people with job searches and lifelong learning from babies to seniors. We also remain committed to offering the digitized collections of our local newspapers. For some time now, we've offered access to the digital editions of the Seattle Times, Historical Edition, and over the last 2 years, we've been adding content from the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. Both can be found online at sbl.org. So if you're ever researching the past, you can trust the library and its resources to help you uncover our local history. In closing, thank you all for supporting our library, for being readers, for being committed to the values of democracy and journalism, and for being with us tonight. Now it's my great pleasure to turn over the program to Fred Nelson, the photo editor who selected the photos for the 2021 edition of the Pictures of the Year. He will then be joined by Seattle Times photojournalist Amanda Snyder and Jenny Buchanan to present this year's Pictures of the Year program. Fred, welcome.
Thank you, Seattle Public Library, for once again hosting this unique event. Before showing the Pictures of the Year, I'd like to talk a little about photo editing and show you some newspaper pages. We'll start with a normal front page, this one from November 27th. The centerpiece is a story by photographer Ken Lambert and reporter Daisy Zavala about a family whose dairy farm flooded in the night and their struggle to save their dairy cows. Unfortunately, 44 dairy cows were lost in the flood. Ken shot many photos that day, but photo editor Angie Gottschalk and I were really drawn to this one for the lead position. Ken is working close to the family, but they are completely in their moment. They know he's there, of course, but it's as if he's invisible to them. In this lead photo, their faces tell so much, and the background adds important context. Afterwards, Ken put up his drone and set the wider scene of the farm and its landscape. In combination, these photos are storytelling, have a great sense of place, and a whole lot of heart. I also want to point out the page design, which is understated and effective. Also notice the overline and the main headline. The words were written with the story and the photos in mind. Headline words and pictures working together. How can you not read the story? We'd consider this a really good front page for a normal day. And then there's an abnormal day, January 6th. There may have been a script for this day, but we didn't have it. I have worked for many years with A1 news editor Melissa Davis and A1 designer Rita Wong. They are great sounding boards and a pleasure to work with. That history really helped us on January 6th. We're all working remotely, of course, watching as the situation goes from bad to worse to chaos. Before the outcome of the day was even known, an avalanche of wire photos was already pouring in. We also had 2 staff photographers in Olympia for a related protest. We added 6 more inside pages for the story. The key starting question always is, what will be the lead photo on A1? We kept coming back to this photo of a Capitol police officer being swept aside by the mob breaking into the building under a Confederate flag. We also added the smaller photo of police making arrests to show that they eventually regained control. We know that readers often look at the photos first and later return to the written stories, so the photo sequence has to make sense on its own. For the 6 inside pages, a simple beginning, middle, and end approach made sense, and we went with it. The first inside page is the Trump rally, leading with this Orwellian scene and paired with the image of Trump raising his clenched fist. On the facing page, the mob is storming the Capitol and overrunning Capitol Police. Turning the page, with a story quoting local congresswomen, we go inside the Capitol as the insurrectionists break in, and one drops from the balcony onto the House floor. We also had 2 photographers in Olympia when a group of Trump supporters tried to storm the governor's mansion. We led with Alan Berner's sobering photo of a lone state trooper trying to slow them down, paired with Ken Lambert's picture of a standoff on the porch. And on the last 2 pages, a double truck where we can run a big photo across the gutter, a photo that captures the tenseness and fear inside the House chambers before the members were evacuated to safety. Add in some looting, the return of authority to the halls, and we're done. 13 photos across 7 pages. Let's hope this kind of day remains abnormal. And now, let's look at the Seattle Times 2021 Pictures of the Year. I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker, Amanda Snyder. Amanda has taken a unique route to her current position. starting first as a photo production assistant, then wowing us with a freelance photo essay she did for the Pacific Northwest magazine, and then earning a temporary gig subbing for a photographer on maternity leave. Almost immediately after that assignment started, the pandemic struck, and Amanda was off to the races.
Thank you so much for that introduction. My name is Amanda Snyder, and this is really special for me to be presenting my work at the Photos of the Year show this year. Only about 5 years ago, I was in the audience at the library for the Photos of the Year show, watching some of my favorite Seattle Times photographers share their work. And I was just hoping and wishing that someday I would be able to share my work alongside of them. So I am really honored to be sharing my work here today. So a little about me again is I was hired by the Seattle Times in 2017 for photo production. So this means I worked on the photo desk. So some of the things that I would do is I would pick photos for the print section of the Nation World. And I would also help with assigning things to photographers, and I would put file photos on online stories. And those are some of the things that I would do in that position. It's a really important position in our newsroom, and I was able to work with everyone across all sections. And so that was really special for me to do and to get to know everyone. And I did that for about 2 years, and I was really itching to get out from behind the desk and to pursue some of my own stories. So I wanted to share the first photo essay that I did for the Seattle Times on the Washington Youth Academy in Bremerton. I worked on this project back in 2018, so before there was a pandemic that took up much of our lives and the news that we see today. But as a photographer, a lot of the photo essays that I work on have a personal connection to my life. I became interested in military type academies after watching my younger brother join the Army at such a young age and go through this radical transformation. So I did some research online for military type academies in Washington, and this led me to the Washington Youth Academy. So this is a residential program for teenagers from across the state who have dropped out of high school or who are close to dropping out of high school. So this is seen as a last resort to earn back the credits they need to graduate. I visited the program several times over 6 months to document one cohort of students from beginning to end, really through all the ups and the downs. Some of the cadets said they struggled with school and life at home, but when they went through the academy, they struggled in a way that left them with a lot of rewards and accomplishments. It was really interesting to see the change in my brother and then witness it all over again with some of these cadets as well. So of the 165 that started the program, 145 finished, and about half or 43% earned the 8 credits that they could get. So in comparison, a full year of high school is 6 credits, and they did 8, or they could do 8 in 6 months, and about half of them did that. I learned a lot as a photographer working on trying to tell a cohesive story with this one, really from beginning to end. Hence not having too many photos of people hugging or crying, which I did take a lot of, but showing the full range of emotion and the journey that the cadets went through throughout this program. So this was the final product. It was published in our Pacific Northwest magazine, which loves photos. And I was really proud of how this turned out. I mean, we edited down to like 15 for print. I took thousands of photos. And then the online had about 25. But yeah, really the first thing I did for the Seattle Times. And I was really thankful for all the editors and for all the photographers that looked through this, the amount of 6 months that it took me to do. But yeah, I was really proud of the way that turned out. After this project and a few other stories, I applied for an opportunity to be a staff photographer while another photographer was on leave. And my first day of this was January 2020. So as you can tell, it has been anything but traditional staff photographer the last 2 years, just covering everything. A lot of my photography in 2020 has been related to COVID-19. I dealt with a lot of breaking news, as our whole newsroom really has as well. We went completely remote as a newsroom and have been remote these last 2 years for the pandemic. But really, as things were going into lockdown, I worked with reporter David Gutman to do a story about how things were looking in Seattle, which was really empty at the time. And this was in early March when all the lockdowns were starting to happen. So I ran around Seattle for 2 days to show how things were different. We kind of approached it as a timestamp. So at 5 p.m., there usually would be traffic, but there was just no traffic. So this photo would symbolize the change that was happening. And I'm really trying to capture these details of a postponed show or empty shelves and playgrounds being taped off and restaurants being cleared. And I remember being in the grocery store taking this photo when I was notified that the schools would be shutting down. So things were constantly in flux. And as a photographer and as a whole staff, we were working overtime to get this story out to our readers and to community. And we really just had so much limited information at the time, but we wanted to share what was going on in Seattle since it was the first epicenter of COVID-19, really one of the first. So fast forward and our day-to-day life is completely altered and changed. I mean, really everything has become a photo and is newsworthy. This is our new normal. And this photo of Inslee and Mayor Durkin, for example, and other state leaders, they're having a meeting, after a press conference about a field hospital at Lumen Field. And they can't meet in a small room anymore. So here they are outside the bathroom doing their spread out in a circle, doing their meeting. And so things have become more and more interesting where a press conference wouldn't really be noteworthy, but this meeting all of a sudden looks different. Then we have photos of a swimming lesson starting back up with the instructor now wearing face shields, and we see masks and shields everywhere. And that's more normalized. And testing for COVID isn't going away. I think in the beginning, I wasn't able to capture this as much since it was so stigmatized to have COVID. But now I'm able to capture the lines and getting people tested, and it's back to our day-to-day. And children are going back to school from remote learning, and some are still continuing those old habits of chewing their pencil even through their mask. And then we have resorts who were prepping to reopen back in 2020, and some still are prepping to reopen. And here we have kind of a different photo of her making sure that the chairs are 6 feet apart before they get ready to reopen. So as a photographer, we are constantly looking for different photos or details, but now it feels like everything changed so rapidly, and really everything feels like a photo or a news story. And that is super overwhelming, but I'm really just trying to document history in all aspects of our lives. Soon, a beat of mine became traveling to different parts of the state to document stories related to COVID-19. In March of 2020, I worked on a story with Hal Brenton in Quincy, where a man in his 80s was the first to pass away from COVID-19. And this was on the eastern side of the state. So we were trying to tell a story of a community undergoing a lot of change and kind of prepping for this change with this new virus that had come up. This photo is of 2 of his friends who were quarantining after having been in contact with the man who had passed away. So they weren't able to kind of be with their community at this time. And as a photographer, we're taught to capture these intimate moments and be close to our subjects. And that was beginning to change a lot. And I noticed that on this trip, just having to keep our distance and stay outside. It's hard not to be in the same room as somebody and to be talking with them at such a distance. It was a really big challenge to do that. And I noticed that a lot on this trip. And we came back in December of 2020, so almost 7-8 months later, to document the Soap Lake, which is in Eastern Washington. A long-term care facility was hit really hard by COVID-19 in November, with many of the staff and the residents becoming sick. And they did persevere. Some of the staff worked 24 hours to cover for shifts for people who were sick. But unfortunately, of the residents that got sick, 31 of them got sick, 15 had passed away. And when we met up with them, they were getting ready to furlough some of the staff because there was too many empty beds. So it's interesting to be there in March of 2020, where the first death had happened from COVID-19, and to come back so many months later and follow up with this facility that was just hit so hard by COVID-19. And even some of them are still recovering from this. It was just really sad of a story to cover in 2020. And then a big story of 2021 was vaccines and vaccinations. So I worked on a story with Evan Bush where we went out to Stehekin and Holden Village, which are some of the most remote places in Washington. They're off Lake Chelan, and you have to drive and then take a couple-hour boat ride to get there. So there's no roads to get there. And so we were following these two paramedics who were giving out the second dose. They had gotten the boat to take them out there and had set this whole thing up to give out the vaccinations for the village and then for Stehekin. And tourism was really big, so they hadn't had any tourism that had come through. And while they're isolated from COVID, they're also just isolated from the world in general. So they were really looking forward to these vaccinations. And they invited us along to be able to capture the residents getting their second dose. And they had said that they felt a lot of relief getting their second dose. Another big story of 2021 after the vaccinations was the reconnecting of families and friends. And I worked with this story with photographer Erica Schultz, and we did a call out to find some people that were reconnecting. And this is a photo of Chelsea and Michael Cooper, who with their 15-month-old daughter, Rosemary, and they're meeting Anne, her grandmother, for the first time. They hadn't seen each other since she was a week old. So they had done a bunch of Skyping and FaceTime over the last year, but this was reconnecting with the grandmother and the grandfather. And this was at SeaTac Airport. So she was apprehensive, but clearly she did warm up a little bit after that. So I'm at a group called Women United, which is a group that serves and supports grandmothers who are raising their grandchildren. And they had all just been vaccinated. So they were about to get together in person to celebrate the 7th anniversary of their engagement center and one of the founder's granddaughter's birthdays. So this was really special. They had all made masks and about to throw them up in the air to kind of show that they are less anxious about COVID with the vaccinations. And little be known that we would still be wearing masks, but it was a really nice moment. And then along with adult vaccines later came vaccines for children. And I really love this photo because everyone can remember being scared of getting shots when they were younger. And the mom is just so relieved that her daughter is able to get the vaccine, but you know that she's scared to get it as well. Lastly, I want to talk about working and photographing in hospitals throughout this pandemic. I was really advocating early on to go into a hospital to be able to document that. I didn't think we were capturing the full extent of the pandemic and showing all the hard work that the medical staff was putting in. So I raised my hand pretty early on. And I've been in downtown hospitals and rural hospitals at this point, but every time I am so anxious to be there, even with all the gear and the masks that I put on. I'm just thinking about my family, and I'm thinking about all the people that I come in contact with for other stories outside of that. And I just know that I need to be extremely careful, and doesn't make the anxiety go away, but I think about it a lot. I do remember Kayla, she said something poignant. She was a nurse we were following. She said, like, we are here every day and that this is our reality. And it made me truly appreciate the hard work they were putting in. And I'm only there for a few hours. They're there every day doing this work. So it's emotional seeing people on ventilators. And I know that some of their family aren't even able to come in and see them. So it just makes the work all the more important when I'm there. Something to know is we're not able to photograph patients or information related to them without their permission. So unfortunately, a lot of them are on ventilators and aren't able to say yes. And really, the consistent story over the last 2 years has been about the overrun, hardworking medical staff and the staffing shortages that they are continuing to experience. So that is what I'm working on, and that's what you see in a lot of these photos. The one patient I photographed that had COVID, this one really hit home for me. Her name was Alyssa. So she was unvaccinated and recovering from COVID-19 after a 6-week hospital stay at Central Washington Hospital in Wenatchee. So her and her mother got sick and they had went to Quincy Hospital and they didn't have any beds for them. So they were sent over to Wenatchee and luckily they had some beds. And she had spent time in the ICU and was so sick that she talked to palliative care, kind of read her last rites and everything. And so Alyssa was my age at the time. She was 28 when I met her. And she was kind enough to let me photograph her in such a vulnerable state and recovering. And I heard her story and thought what it would be like to pass away at my age with so much more life left to live. I think about her a lot, really, and to be even that sick at that age and not take life for granted. Even she said that. And, especially as I've met so many people during the pandemic who have lost so much, it was just really emotional picture for me. And I have got my hopes up so many times that things will return to normal, and they just don't seem to be returning to normal. I'm not going to hide the fact that I am very exhausted and this whole thing makes me really sad, but I am going to keep doing my job and documenting history. I think with all this sadness that I cover, there is a lot of hope. And I just really tried to hold on to that hope a little bit more than that sadness a lot of the time. But next, I do want to introduce our newest photographers, Jenny, and she is also a new one at the Seattle Times and is going to be sharing some of her coverage of a chaotic year in Seattle sports. So please welcome her.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Buchanan, and I'm one of the newest staff photographers here at the Seattle Times. I was hired and started working in August of 2021, so my photos of the year are more like photos of the past 4.5 months. In order to get this presentation up to the editor-mandated 15 minutes, I thought I would start with a little background info about me. This is me. From an early age, I clearly had a love of the outdoors and a very attuned fashion sense, especially when it came to fly hats. Photography for me started as a hobby when my grandfather gave me a Canon AE1 and eventually turned into a career when I was hired by the Everett Herald 2 weeks after graduating from the University of Washington. The highlight at the Herald was the 2010 Winter Olympics, where nighttime bobsledding made for some interesting silhouettes. Preliminary figure skating was the perfect place for some shutter drags. And my ski idol, Lindsey Vonn, won the gold in the women's downhill. I worked at the Herald for a decade, long enough to see the Seahawks swarmed under in a Super Bowl that can only be followed by a very large asterisk. Long enough for the defense to undress opposing quarterbacks. Long enough for the fans to become the loudest in the NFL. Long enough to witness immaculate receptions. Give Pete Carroll heartburn. See beast mode do beastly things. And watch the Hawks finally win a Super Bowl, this one in very convincing fashion. After the Herald, I worked as a photo editor for Microsoft, and during the fall, also edited for one of the Seahawks team photographers. I was deep in editing mode for Super Bowl 49 and was on the field for less than 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes, however, happened to coincide with the Seahawks' final drive. The one that they didn't run the ball. Richard Sherman watching as the Patriots celebrated their 28-24 win was one of the 8 frames I shot of the game, and one I will never forget. But enough about the past. Let's talk about sports in 2021. Okay, well, sports in 2021 weren't that great either, especially if you were a team that called Seattle home. Let's start with the Mariners. As a lifelong Pacific Northwest resident, the Mariners used to be my team. We would listen to all the games on the radio, so much so that Dave Niehaus seemed like he was part of the family. Like so many others, our crescendo of fandom came in 1995, as close as any Mariner fan has come to a World Series. It's been a hard road since then. This year had promise, real promise, and by the time I joined the staff in August, the postseason was still in play, an unusual position for a team that has been known to be out of the playoff chatter by June. They had solid infield play, exciting new kids that gave us hope for the future. Our pitching stars struggled somewhat, but the team made up for it with timely hitting that resulted in wins and Gatorade showers. Then came the final series of the season. The goal was simple: win the first 3 games and they would be assured at least of a 163rd game. The first game of the series felt like a legitimate playoff game. More than 44,000 people packed T-Mobile Park. Yellow Believe signs were everywhere. Abraham Toro came sliding across the plate for a run in the second inning, a huge smile on his face. But unlike so many one-run games that the Mariners have won in the season, they couldn't come back from 2-1, as the final out saw Jared Kelenic slam his helmet to the ground in frustration, while the Los Angeles Angels pitcher celebrated in the background. The Mariners would win the next game, but then lose the final game of the season and miss the playoffs for the 20th consecutive year. Soccer has always been one of my favorite sports to photograph. I'm not a fan of the acting, but the action is superb, and the lack of helmets means we can see their faces and their purple hair. It was very fun to see the Rain play at Lumen Field this season before a packed house, and will be even better to see them there all of next season. I hope you can join us. Seattle versus Portland is always a sight to see. The Sounders continued their winning goals and stoppage time mastery with precisely that against Santos Lagunas in the Leagues Cup. Newcomer Leo Chu put Seattle on notice with his first home goal against the Whitecaps. And hometown favorite Jordan Morris returned to play after tearing his ACL in February, after initially being ruled out for the whole season. Even the other team congratulated him when he walked onto the pitch. In a sport where tempers are almost never checked, seeing this made me feel good about the world. The Sounders limped into the playoffs after a stellar first half of the season. They played Real Salt Lake in the first round. Following 120 scoreless minutes, the game went to a shootout. In what I can only call one of the best decisions by our editors, we sent 2 photographers to the game. Dean Rutz was in the south end and I was in the north. For whatever reason, photographers were not allowed to switch sides of the field this year, meaning that as time ran out and it became increasingly clear that the game would be decided on kicks, one of us would be very close to the penalty kick goal while the other would be 120 yards away. 120 yards away from the action is not a place you want to be. It's just too far. It was decided that the kicks would be on the south end. Cool. Dean would be the Times photographer in the much better position, and I would be locked in 5 million miles away. But like I said before, thank goodness for great staffing decisions, and thank goodness even more for having teammates you can trust like Dino. The Sounders lost on kicks 6-5. Kellen Rowe's kick was stopped by Real Salt Lake goalie David Ochoa, and Stephen Fry got a piece of Salt Lake's winning kick, but not enough to stop it from sneaking into the goal. Excitement was high for Seattle's newest major league team. For my decade at the Herald, I shot the Everett Silvertips, who are a minor league hockey team. Minor league hockey is nothing like the NHL. Just the speed at which they play is incredibly different, not to mention that in the NHL, there's actual passing. They don't just dump the puck off and hope for the best. Got my feet wet with a quick trip to the frozen north to shoot a preseason game against the Canucks, and then it was off to Vegas to shoot the franchise's very first game. Now, I don't know about you, but showgirls at a hockey game, heck, showgirls anywhere not at a showgirls show, is a new one for me, but it's Vegas, baby. Anything goes. The Kraken played like an expansion team, and what is becoming a common thread lost 4-3. Their first goal, unfortunately, went away from me, but the celebration turned my direction, which came together for a nice frame. 11 days later, the Kraken played their first home game at the beautiful $1.2 billion Climate Pledge Arena. Fans were excited to see the building. I accidentally wandered into some players warming up with a soccer ball. The puck dropped at home for the very first time, and the Kraken lost 4-2. Here are some more photos from what can only be described as a disappointing first season. Okay, so that's not a hockey photo, but I shot it on my way to a hockey game, so we'll count it. Ryan Donato tries to get one past the human wall that is the spectacular Marc-Andre Fleury, the flower. Goaltender woes, water edition. Pucks in the air, and pucks going into the goal. And now for the University of Washington part of our program. We'll start with football. Everything started out sunny. UW had a young, vibrant head coach in Jimmy Lake who came out of the tunnel for the first time in 2021 with a clap and a smile. But things turned ugly when the game started. Guys couldn't hold on to passes. The Grizzlies quarterback sailed into the end zone and was mobbed by teammates. Lake walked off the field in disgust, and Montana celebrated their victory on the W at midfield. The next few games were better, with wins against Arkansas State and Cal. And then came a killer against UCLA, a 24-17 loss that the Huskies were in until the final few minutes of the game, when UCLA defensive back Devin Kirkwood intercepted a pass intended for Jalen McMillan at the 4-yard line. Then the Ducks came to town, and so did the rain. The Huskies still couldn't hold on to passes. And at the end of another loss, Jimmy Lake would have to physically remove his players from the field as they started to jaw with Oregon. It was an ugly scene, and apparently I was not the only one to think so, as Lake would be fired 8 days later. The next home game, the Dogs had a new interim head coach, Bob Gregory. But things didn't go much better, especially for Dylan Morris here, taking a helmet to the chest. After a loss to Colorado and Boulder, the Huskies returned for the last game of the season, where they hoped to soar like a bird in the Apple Cup. But the Cougars totally took it to the Huskies, smashing them for a 40-13 win. Students and fans rushed the field as the players hoisted the Apple Cup high. The jury is still out on how good the UW men's and women's basketball teams are. Both had COVID issues and were idle for parts of the season so far. Here are a few frames from games in December. Purple Huskies versus Red Huskies in a block shot by the Red guys. A very Kraken-esque rebound. Husky center Nancy Mulkey is 6'9". She's a beast. She's amazing. And when you shoot her from a floor remote, she looks even taller. Basketball players have hops, even when we're on the dribble drive. And then you can shoot a decent dunk photo. And then you can shoot the same dunk photo with a remote, and all of a sudden, it gets so much better. Now there's one final team, and maybe the most disappointing given the expectations coming into the season. I'm talking Seahawks football. I haven't missed a Seahawks football game since 2004. From 2004 until the 2013 season, I photographed every home game for the Everett Herald. Starting in 2014, my role changed from photographer to photo editor when I began editing for the fantastically talented Rod Marr, who was one of the Seahawks team photographers and in the distant past, a photojournalist for the Times. So although I haven't missed a game in 16 seasons, for the past 7 years, I've mostly been inside a nice, warm, dry photo room. Not anymore. Time for me to bust out, and with my August 16th start date, there was no time like the present. We started with a few preseason games because even photographers, and especially me, need a preseason. There was hair flying, stretching, secrets, and diving touchdowns. And then on to the regular season. DK got a color refresh on the hair. The wind whipped the giant American flag at midfield. The defense played well at times. Bobby Wagner, of course, his normal amazing self. And then it all seemed to go wrong, and I think all of Seattle was Pete Carroll in this moment. The thing about football is it's an incredibly long season, and the next week brought another game, this time in the architecturally surreal US Bank Stadium in Minneapolis. Pete warmed up in lockstep with Quandre Diggs. DK with the pylon dive and the touchdown. Once again, it seemed to all be going well, and then it didn't. In the second half, Ross got tossed around like a rag doll. DK missed a catch late in the fourth, and the Hawks lost another. Next week in the Bay Area, it was a hot, hot day. It was October, but the temperature on the field was a blazing 95 degrees. I was hot, but so were the Seahawks, scoring on a diving DK touchdown again, sacking and eventually knocking out Jimmy G, who would not return for the second half of the game, an Irish jig dancing Alex Collins. I needed to drink like 5 gallons of water after the game and yelled at myself for not bringing sunscreen, but it was a good win. A short week brought a Thursday night game and the action green uniforms. If there is a color that Canon cameras do not like, it is action green. Nikons do well with it, but unfortunately Canons go yellow or very blue in an instant. It's a tough color. Another knock against the action green, it's the color Russell Wilson was wearing when he got his finger mangled by the arm of Aaron Donald in the third quarter. It's almost as if Tyler Lockett knew his quarterback had been hurt on this play. Next home game was against the Saints. At first, the offense looked good and the cheerleaders agreed. But then Rashad Penny and seemingly the entire season was flipped upside down with another loss at home. This is one of my favorite images I've shot so far for the Times. DK had just scored on a 16-yard reception from Geno Smith. He celebrated by giving the goalpost a great big hug. I loved it, the refs did not. Metcalf was penalized 15 yards on the play. All eyes were on the middle digit of Russell Wilson's right hand when he finally returned to the field in Seattle. It looked very red and still very swollen, and the Seahawks dropped the contest to the Cardinals. Away games are always fun. There's new backgrounds to work with and new angles to try. The defense and special teams played pretty well against Washington. But if you don't score points, you probably won't win games. December brought the return of the gray pants, and at first it looked like it might have been a bad omen as Joey Bosa knocked the ball loose from Russell Wilson. But another win over the 49ers followed by a win against the hapless Texans, and it was full speed ahead on the gray pants. A note about the Texans game, Houston has a retractable roof stadium, but before 2020, the last time they had opened it was in 2014. It was a lovely December day in Texas, and I, for one, was glad to play with some interesting light. This is Seattle, right? It should be raining, not snowing, but snow it did. I've seen John Deere's clear snow from Lambeau Field, but I've never seen one clear snow here. And this operator definitely had their work cut out for them. I probably wasn't as creative with the snow as I should have been, but honestly, I was just trying to stay warm. I think DK was also just trying to stay warm. His normal midriff length sleeveless hoodie replaced with a shirt that had actual sleeves. Wilson with the long TD pass. I love shooting photos of Pete Carroll. He's just so incredibly expressive. Eventually the snow subsided, and instead of cool backgrounds, we were just left with cold. The Seahawks should have beaten the Bears, but instead former Seattle tight end Jimmy Graham hauled in a 15-yard touchdown pass with two defenders all over him for what became the winning score. It was a hard year for Seattle sports. Well, that was the end of my 2021. I had an extremely fun and exhausting fall, just the way I like it. Very much looking forward to 2022 and all the adventures to be had. I've already shot 2 amazingly fun assignments this year: staffing shortages and issues opening up all of the Stevens Pass ski area terrain, and the struggles that the city of Leavenworth faced while trying to dig out from record snowfall. I feel that my official title should now be Jennifer Buchanan, Seattle Times Snow Correspondent. Thank you all very much for watching. And now it is my honor to introduce our video team's work. I want to thank Ramon Donpour for editing a year's worth of video storytelling. Here are the Seattle Times videos of the year.
It's been a tough year for everyone in the nation with COVID, and people's lives have not been the same since.
We woke up one day and the world was sick.
We got the test back. This thing is gonna change everything, and we stood in just stunned silence.
It felt like we were locked up and that there was no key to get out. It was just isolation. Totally, that's what it was.
I have to believe that we're all resilient. We're ready to be done.
We recognize the challenges that the vaccine distribution has had on communities of color. There is a large immigrant refugee seniors in Southeast Seattle, where a lot of them might not have access to a computer to make appointments. So we decided to bring the vaccination to them. We need to get a lot of more information into the community and for them to understand the safety and efficacy of the vaccine itself.
There's nothing like the experience of being on the bed to inform a caregiver who stands beside it. You know, true empathy of the experience for the patient and for the family. Being on my side of the bed is a welcome change from the last year. There are a lot of conversations with yourself to say, we need to be okay with this if this is as good as it gets.
Mom got sick first, then my dad. You hear so many people talk about numbers and they don't see people as people. It wasn't their time to go. they should still be here, you know?
The thought of closing the door never come to me until the pandemic hit. It's from few weeks shutting down to months, and don't know when that we're going to get out of this.
This past year, this pandemic has definitely increased my anxiety with things.
Been thinking about, like, what if I got COVID? And also how I felt about recently of all the AAPI attacks and the rise of that. It's just giving me anxiety to leave my house. It's like, who's gonna help me when I really need it?
Here at the Seattle Indian Health Board, we just weren't getting everything that we needed. We were really excited when we got what we thought was a box of PPE. Unfortunately, when we opened that box, instead what we found was a box of body bags. These body bags were the perfect metaphor for how Native people have been treated in this country. I took a body bag out, and when I folded it in half, I could see the dress that I made before it was actually done. And I hope that other Native people, when they see this, know that we don't have to just accept body bags for our people.
If we had 100 trucks here, or even air support, there was no way to stop that fire. A lot of our residents needed housing immediately. They needed temporary housing, and we were in COVID. Everything was taken away during, lockdowns, when you're supposed to stay at home. What happens when you don't have a home? When it was still smoking, it was still burning, people came and said, it doesn't seem like it now, but there's a way forward.
My goal was not actually to be an advocate for old growth. It was simply to provide the public with as much accurate information as I could about these forests. Our job is to collaborate with nature to the mutual benefit of the forest ecosystem and society.
My dad was a refugee from Vietnam. They came during the fall of Saigon, and they got here in like 75.
It's deja vu again. The fall of Kabul and all that stuff, it just played out, and I saw the planes and I was like, oh my God. And Nathan's like, Dad, that's exactly what happened to you.
We're trying to demonstrate how private sponsorship programs can be refugee-to-refugee solidarity through those shared experiences.
You can tell when you look at them that somebody loves them. Somebody has taken enough care to capture their image through the eyes of other people who love them.
Black farmers used to have this major part in farming in America, and less than 1% of farmland is owned by Black farmers.
Black and brown youth would paint themselves into their surroundings, as a way to say that they exist.
Growing up, it was hard to not be the model of a ballet dancer. For Black men in ballet, we're historically known to be strong, manly partners, and I never fit that mold. I've been told many times I need to be more manly, I need to stand up and be bigger and stronger, and so now I'm reflecting on who I am and who I want to be as a person.
There is no one time for trans people or non-binary people to come out in life. It happens at any time throughout a person's lifespan, and it's impacted or informed by so many different factors. Our young folks, they don't bat an eye. And the challenges that we most commonly see are actually with adults who impose their beliefs and values on young people.
It's not something that has to be a surprise to you. That is my hope, that kids can just be kids and discover things about themselves, and to not have other people be somehow surprised by that, because there's really nothing to be surprised about. It's a kid growing up and learning things.
I feel like this pandemic has helped a lot of us to really figure out who we are and where we are. At the end, we'll look back and be able to say we got through this time. So, just staying strong.
All right, everyone. Okay, the challenge with being the first up after something like that is suddenly I like wiping the tears away and I got shiny eyes and the whole bit. So, what an amazing thing. All right, we have some time to invite our fabulous guests right here with us. I see Fred, you're here. Jenny, Amanda, welcome.
Hi.
Welcome. All right. My screen is looking a little funky, but as long as the team says we're good to go, then it's not my view to worry about. So we have some questions and we have a little bit of time. Are you ready for a few of them? Excellent. All right. Well, first off, again, thank you for being here. The power of emotion. I laughed, I cried, I kind of gasped a little bit. And whether it's a still photography, the videos, there's some really powerful things here. So it's amazing. Okay, so I'm going to start with the first question from Sue Ellen White. When you approach a subject or a scene, what are the first considerations about how you frame the image? And I'm going to let you decide how you all want to go because you know each other.
I can start. Yeah, that's a good question. I think it definitely depends on the event and what I'm photographing. But let's just say I'm going to an event. A lot of what I look for is emotion. So, or just like the energy that someone is giving off or these moments that are happening. So that's kind of where I start. And I usually, depending on the situation, introduce myself, or I just photograph that moment and go up later. And a lot of what I'm thinking about also is this tight, medium, and kind of wider shot when I go into some of these events. So you see that a lot in like our photos of the year, these like tight ones. And then the medium one is often the very descriptive one. And then the wide kind of shows the event. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about. If it's more intimate, then I can kind of build trust with somebody and work with that. So.
Nice, nice. Jenny or Fred, what do you, because you all have a different style, right? Every photographer has their like fingerprints that make you unique in how you view this.
Well, I think, I can speak to a lot of sports photography, which is, incredibly different than, normal photojournalism work. But for sports photography, I think it's important as a journalist and as well as a photographer to go in, knowing the stories behind the games. You're not just there to make pretty photos. You're there to really, tell a story of that game. So putting that all together, is how you begin telling your narrative of the game as far as, how you're approaching what to photograph.
Nice.
As an editor, I'd just say one of the things we try to do is get as much information to the photographer about what the story or situation is that they're going into. So they're just not walking in cold, which is the hardest thing because you often don't have much time. If you have some information, then you have the context you need to make the smart picture. So that's what our goal is here, is to send people out with at least some information about what's happening.
Well, the thing that struck me is, as Jenny's talking sports and the knowledge and so many years of football and you have so much contextual understanding that if you're not close to it, you take it for granted. And yet you actually know the personalities, or you are building that character, especially like a Pete Carroll. It was a perfect example. And Amanda, I think that when you shared the personal piece of this and kind of your own interest in the journey and following the cohort of cadets, can you talk a little bit more about how that impacted you and just how, reflecting on it and talking about it today, and that is such a big portfolio of work, how it's shaping you?
Yeah, I mean, that was back in 2018 too. So it was a very different time. But I think, like I mentioned, it was one of the first photo essays that I did. And luckily there was a beginning and there was an end. And I think a lot of the work that I do now, it's like hard to tell when there's an end to it too. But I think really just telling that story from beginning to end has helped my photography a lot. I think also having photo editors and photographers look at it, kind of telling me what is an impactful photo to them. I really learned a lot. You can learn a lot from photo editing, not just being the one to take the picture, because we took thousands and thousands, or I took thousands of pictures. So working through what kind of pops for people and what tells more of the story with that. And also I just got really great access with that story, and that is super important. And I've learned that going forward. I mean, now we're in COVID time, and I'm not able to get really close to people, and there's this distance there and harder to build relationships. So that's taught me a lot in a different time that we're in now. But it's funny looking back at those photos. I'm like, oh, I could go up and talk to them and right then and there. So, but yeah, that's how it's kind of impacted me.
Here's a quick round robin one for all of you. It's like, when did you know you wanted to be a photographer?
I guess I can start. My family and I took a trip to Africa when I was in high school. You know, my dad blew all of the money, and, you know, we're like, we're going to Africa. And I was lucky enough to have some good family friends to loan me some really fun cameras to play with, you know, and I shot 36 rolls of film, which, you know, back then in high school was a really big deal. But it kind of started from there. I actually went to school. I have a biology degree. You know, so I wasn't going to be a photographer. I was going to be a doctor. Sorry, mom and dad. I'm a photographer now. But yeah, it was one of those things that was just so much fun to do. You know, if there's that saying where if you love what you do for work, you'll never work a day in your life. And this is truly how I feel about it.
That's a gift. That is special to have that type of career.
Yeah.
I started taking pictures. I remember being in the darkroom in high school and really loving that, and getting all my friends to be a part of these kind of photo projects that we had to do. And then I got my first camera, thanks mom, and started taking pictures. And one day, I think it was a teacher that said, do you ever think about making this a career? And I was like balked. And I was like, no. And then here comes college, and I knew I wanted to do journalism because I've always been interested in telling stories, and I could never find one job I wanted to do because I was so interested in different things. So I was like, oh, I'll just learn about them all and do stories and connect with people. And so I wanted to do broadcast journalism. And then I remember I do not want to be in front of a camera, even though I am now. I did not want to be in front of the camera. So I kind of gravitated towards visual journalism, but I was like, I want to be behind the camera, working with people and telling these stories. So it was more the love of journalism. And then I've also just always taken pictures and been artistic and combining those. And then I think when I joined the newspaper and got enough confidence to take pictures of people, I was like, this is it. Fred, I want to know you.
Yeah, you know, I was really lucky. I was well into adulthood. I was out of college and working a variety of jobs and traveling around. And I went to visit my brother, who was living in Oregon at the time, and borrowed his camera just out of curiosity. And I put that camera to my eye, and it was like a light bulb went off. And honestly, it just moved me. And I really immediately liked taking pictures of people. So that really led to telling stories with photos and about people. So that was a long time ago, but yeah, it's really changed my life, obviously.
There's a lot of lovely personal stuff here about all of you and your careers and your journeys. We're kind of coming close to the end of the time. And so I guess this is going to be a question, not so much a technical question, but it's really about, this question comes in as, what has given you hope this year? And as a photographer or in any aspect of your life, what gives you hope, and what are you aiming for? How's that to stump you?
Can I just say, I really appreciate, I don't know if it gives me hope, but I really appreciate being able to do this kind of work during the pandemic. We're all locked down. I'm in my basement, which my wife calls the coal mine. You know, for me particularly, it's been feel so fortunate to be able to continue to do this work when so many people can't work. It's really been important. And it also led me to think about a little bit. I just need to say, the Pictures of the Year started before I even came to the Seattle Times, which was 38 years ago. And the person who had started this tradition was the editor of the magazine, I don't know, it was 40 plus years ago, Kathy Andrizevic, who was just an incredible personality in the newsroom. And she started this, and Gary Settle, who hired me, was the original photo editor for a lot of these things. And I picked it up, and it's such a pleasure to be part of something that predates my work here. It predates many people who are here tonight. I'm hoping they're out there somewhere and on watching the show. Thank you guys, if you are.
I think what gives me hope is that a fantastic paper like the Seattle Times is still willing to hire staff photographers in an age where, a lot of newspapers have really, cut their staffs and really gone bare bones. I have a dream job. I have like my dream job. And the fact that I was able to get it, during a pandemic, it really gives me hope for the kind of product that the Seattle Times is, that they're still willing to spend on journalism. That gives me an incredible amount of hope.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback off that too. Really, my coworkers have just been there for me and been there for all the stories that I pitch. And they really just motivate me as well. And that's given me a lot of hope in the work that I'm doing and in the year that we're going through as well. I think also having been in these hospitals and seeing some of the medical healthcare workers, that gives me a lot of hope that they're there day in and day out, kind of going through the ringer of everything. And it makes me want to show up for my job every day and tell really important stories. And I don't know, just makes me want to keep going.
You all are doing incredibly important work. You really are. And it is such a treat for us to be able to have the partnership where we can put this together. We have had hundreds, I don't know, we might have close to 1,000 people here tonight, and they're all over the place. And it just goes to show that the reach that you have is massive. And we are just really fortunate to be able to do this with you. When you think of, so I'm saying thank you to all you. I want to say thank you to Phil Rowe. I want to say, Danny, thank you. And Katie Irwart, I saw that you posted up. Now, Katie is the first person at the Seattle Times that I worked with 100 years ago. And, the journey you started at the Times and getting to this point are late to the game, but being part of being able to share your incredible work for our community, both in Seattle and now all over the world, it's very, very special. So thank you for this opportunity. And for all of you who are here with us tonight, thank you for going on this Zoom journey with us. A little bit of technology continues to evolve. It's different every time we sign on, but I think it looks like everybody was able to participate. This is just a great example of the kind of thing that we can do in partnership with the community. The foundation works every day with our library. And of course, I can't be more proud of the work that our library is doing. So just like your creativity that's been unleashed through this last 2 years, our library has done incredible work, and it's been different, right? It's been harder, it's changed, but it's unleashed a level of creativity that I think is just a pretty special thing, and in turn does so much good work for the community. So the Times, you're doing good work. I love what the Seattle Public Library is doing. And with that, I just want to say thanks to all our donors and board members and volunteers and guests and everyone who has joined us tonight. So with that, I just want to say thank you. All right. So long, everyone. Take care.